But the other big sort of news this week was that Delta has sued CrowdStrike. If you remember, CrowdStrike had this big catastrophic failure that took a whole bunch of the internet down. I guess this was a word a couple months back now, right?
Yeah, back in July, an eternity ago.
Exactly. And so Delta has decided to sue them for $500 million in it. And so I have some broad opinions about the specific action, but the big takeaway I know that you were sort of mentioning was the fact that it points to the how reliant the modern enterprise is on all of these vendors for these really fundamental things.
Yes, Delta obviously was brought to a standstill precisely because it considered CrowdStrike to be a foundational part of its IT stack. But also, I think this speaks to uh, CIOs are always trying to figure out what amount of damage is contractually permissible versus when have you broken the contract to an extent that you can ask for more than the cost of the software itself. Because obviously Delta was not paying $500 million a year to CrowdStrike, like or any IT vendor, and honestly, very understandable that they wouldn't. But the fact that Delta was taken down to this extent, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Anytime you see a number that big, you have to assume there's going to be some sort of settlement just to avoid uh, going through the multi-year lawsuit and legal issues that might happen otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, as we talked about at the time, CrowdStrike, this was disastrous for them. You
Mm-hmm.
know, what they did was horrible, and I think there was definitely negligence in terms of how they managed this, both allowing it to happen and then how they responded. So, I think from that level, I think that there's, they're not going to walk out of this unscathed. And from a CIO's perspective, it is as we talked about at the time, an important lesson of just really having to dig deeper than you think you have to understand your risk profile.
Mm-hmm.
I personally think, though, in this case, that Delta is overreaching, simply because the reason their impact was so bad was that they had their own failures, because their competitors were also hit and didn't have anywhere near the same impact. And so when that type of situation happens, it certainly means that they've got a lot more skin in the game. So I think this is a bit of a saving face thing, and it speaks to the fact that as a CIO, I think it's easy to sometimes almost believe that, well, it's everything's in these vendors now, that they're doing all of it. So much of it has to do with how you execute. That execution is all important, and I'm a little bit surprised that Delta's taking this tack, but I guess they feel
Yeah.
like they can probably get some compensation, and they probably need it.
I know if I were still in my IT procurement seat though, I would be staring at this lawsuit like a hawk the entire time to see the arguments that were made and how the court reacts and potentially whether we could also use that same court if it is a positive result for Delta because obviously you always want to figure out which courts and which judges you can potentially take advantage of in a worst case legal scenario.